but we're going to get started in just a moment. I must apologize, we had late access to the room, and when I arrived, there was still a setup for a different group with all their refreshments, and it was a mess. So I really thank all the people who helped with setup, including all of our panel members and our students who volunteered to come today. Thank you very much for your help. We really needed you. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you made the time in your busy schedules to attend this important event. As John is still working diligently on the microphones, I promised to start the day off just by using my big voice. But if you have trouble hearing, just let me know. I can raise the volume. My name is Ruth Antick. I'm a member of the Toronto GRAN group, and we are the organizers and sponsors for this event. We're an active group of women, and we promote social justice and change. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here today on behalf of GTA GRAN. And in case you'd like to speak to anyone from our group, I'd like to ask those members of our group to stand up now, just so people can see who they are. Okay, just take a minute. Thank you. A huge amount of preparation has gone into the planning for this evening. However, in spite of the best laid plans, you know what they say, the people plan and the gods laugh. And today, they really have had a good time with us. I'm not Helen Fish, who volunteered to welcome you this evening. Since she's been sick recently, it feels safer for her to stay at a distance from us. You'll also notice that Talia Bronstein from the Daily Bread Food Bank has been replaced by her colleague, Omar Akida. Oh, thank you. As has our moderator, Izzy Waxman, who is now Grant Goodman. And we're especially grateful to these gentlemen who really stepped in at the very last moment. So thank you. A few housekeeping items. In order to give you the fullest experience, we won't be taking a break during the program. Please feel free to get up and help yourself to refreshments at any time. There is water, coffee, tea, and cookies. And also, pick up materials from our tables whenever you wish. And help yourself if you need to go outside to search for the facilities. They're to the right. One other housekeeping announcement, we'll be doing a videotape of this evening's presentation for our own internal use. The program will begin shortly and be followed by a moderated discussion among our panelists, and then we will welcome your questions. GTA GRAN acknowledges the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and now is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We take this time for a moment of reflection about what happened in the past and what changes can be made going forward in this process of reconciliation and bridging awareness into action. Now, speaking of awareness and action, it's time for me to introduce our esteemed panel. of activists. And we have, oh, Omar, I'm gonna blow it again. We have Omar. Say it once more.
Aquila.
Aquila. I can do that.
It's like Aquila and a bee. Aquila and a bee.
Aquila
and a bee. Yeah, like that.
And Omar is the policy engagement specialist at the Daily Bread Food Bank. He holds a master's in public policy from McGill University. He's the co-author of the annual Who's Hungry report. I put it in the wrong one. And it's a main resource for media, government, and the nonprofit sector, combining the data and policy analysis about food insecurity and poverty in Toronto. He has led the development of the organization's 2022 to 25 advocacy strategy, focusing on direct advocacy with policymakers within all 3 levels of government, and is currently responsible for the implementation. Thank you. Sitting beside Omar, Aquila, there we go, is Pat Dolan, the former co-chair from GRAN, Grandmothers Advocacy Network. Pat has been a member of GRAN since 2013, and she's played a significant role in many ways, including co-chair. She has a degree in political science and a diploma in journalism. Pat retired in 2009, but kept on working. And she was in federal public service, having worked for Environment Canada, Health Canada, Natural Resource Canada. She managed public education, funding community outreach programs that supported individual and community actions on energy efficiency and climate change and biodiversity. While working, Pat volunteered at Shepherds of Good Hope, a shelter and soup kitchen in Ottawa, and she now supports the Alliance to End Homelessness. Over the years, she's also been active in her letter writing. And during the early stages of her working life, Pat lived and taught high school in Nigeria with Kuso. She has traveled from Aylmer, Quebec to join us today. Also joining us from Ottawa is Emma Diowo. Okay, I did it badly. Tell me again.
It's not so bad.
Diowo. And she's the executive director from SeedChange Canada, an organization that she'll tell you about. Before joining SeedChange in 2021, Emma spent 15 years as a leading activist for food sovereignty and food justice. And some of those years, she was executive director of the Black Creek Community Farm, where she worked towards greater food justice with the Toronto Jane Finch community. She was instrumental in the creation of a number of initiatives in the Jane Finch area, like On the Move, Jane Finch Action Against Poverty, and Jane Finch Political Conversation Cafe, as well as Black Creek Food Justice and Mothers in Motion. Emma completed a master's degree at York University looking at decolonization, agroecology, and the expertise of women elders in small-scale farming communities. Impressive, huh? All right, not to leave till the last, but Minerva Sadler-Gray is the partnership and engagement leader for One Campaign in Canada. Her role involves increasing awareness, education, and knowledge about development issues. She also seeks out partners to broaden the reach of specific policies and amplify the message. Minerva has a master's degree in international development She has worked for 20 years, living in South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, and Latin America. Before joining ONE, Minerva worked with Pan American Health Organization Foundation, where she led a regional portfolio that focused on building government relations in Latin America and the Caribbean. Minerva also worked in Central and Latin America and Africa for international human rights organizations that advocate for refugee and migrant rights around the world. Minerva has delivered presentations internationally and has published a piece on poverty and participatory governance in the Caribbean. Our moderator today is Grant Goodman, Associate Director of Maison Canada, the Jewish Response to Hunger. As a member of Maison leadership team, Grant has piloted Maison through a significant period of change since he joined in 2019, growing their team and their impact. And all this was through the pandemic, the worst food crisis of our generation. Last year, Maison funded 360,000 meals through over 260 frontline and grassroots food aid programs and partners in 89 towns and cities across Canada. Prior to joining Maison, Grant attended University of Ottawa. Okay. That was very impressive.
This is me.
And this is me?
That's
Okay.
you.
That's me.
Yeah.
Is there anyone without a program? Then I think we're good to go. Welcome again.
I want to say I was so inspired by the biographies and the impressive credentials of these esteemed panelists. Both inspired by the work they've done, but also perhaps one day to finish my undergraduate degree. Most of the way there didn't quite make it. I'm so grateful to have been invited here to moderate this panel today and to learn from all of you. But before we start, I want to say a few words about my organization, myself, and the scope of the problem we're facing today. I've also woven inextricably into the fabric of these prepared remarks a land acknowledgement. We've already heard one. We're going to hear a second. My name is Grant Goodman, and as mentioned, I'm half the leadership team at Maison Canada, the Jewish Response to Hunger. Maison is a Jewish community foundation that supports small and medium-sized grassroots food aid projects across the country, shelter programs, Meals on Wheels initiatives, food banks. Our partners serve Jewish and non-Jewish people. Since joining the team in 2019, on average at that point, we received about 150 applications for funding every year. As of this year, we are receiving well over 300. This change in the volume of requests for support at our organization reflects the state of hunger more broadly. The hunger crisis is getting worse. It's getting worse locally, it's getting worse nationally, and it's getting worse globally. The number of people suffering from undernourishment keeps rising. As of June 2022, 735 million people are undernourished. That's up from 612 million before the pandemic. Now, these are staggering numbers. They're hard to imagine, but ultimately what we're talking about here is more than 100 million people who are hungry today who weren't hungry 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Poverty, wealth inequality, conflict and combat, colonialism and climate change, all of these things disrupt food production systems. The UN estimates that there are thousands and thousands of people dying of hunger every single day, and yet 1/3 of all global food production is wasted. That's a billion tons every year, rotting away in landfills, producing more greenhouse gases annually than every car on the road and every plane in the sky across the world every year. So compared to the rest of the world, Canada's lucky, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people struggling. Over the past 3 years, the number of food insecure people in Canada has risen from 4.4 million to 6.9 million. People who never used to worry about food have been forced to tighten their belts, and for those barely making ends meet, who used to get by on ramen and chips and bread, like they're finding their cupboards bare. Like there's sometimes for days at a time. So before we begin the discussion with our panelists, and to learn about this issue and what we can do about it together, here's my duplicative land acknowledgement. We gather today here on Indigenous land in the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. This, I hope you know by now. But you may have noticed in other places, land acknowledgements are a little bit simpler. We're on the Coast Salish land, or we're on the Mi'kmaq land. But here we name 4 different groups, at least. And some of them aren't even nations, but massive multinational alliances of 4 to 6 nations. So why do we name so many different people in our land acknowledgement in this place? Well, it turns out if you're trying to get from Saskatchewan to the Atlantic by canoe, it's an essential trade route. The waterways are all connected, but you can't go over Niagara Falls. So the best route is actually the other way, from Lake Huron to Lake Simcoe, and then before you reach Lake Ontario, out the St. Lawrence. There's just one place along this entire continent and a half spanning route where you have to get out and walk. And it's a few kilometers from here. It's called a portage called the Carrying Place. It's just west of the junction. It's believed to have possibly been in use for more than 12,000 years until about 200 years ago. That's 500 generations. This was an international superhighway, basically a short bike ride away. And because it was so critical for trade and sort of political divisions of the time, it was fought over. And so it holds a rich history, not only of struggle, but also peacemaking. Toronto's history as a multicultural hub didn't begin when Europeans arrived. This land has been the bustling downtown of the Northeast since twice as long ago as there was in ancient Egypt. Something else you may have heard. The powerful metaphor of the dish with one spoon, which was formalized as a Wampum Belt Treaty 300 years ago. But the metaphor itself is much older. It says, look, we might speak different languages and dress differently. We may not always like each other. But this land provides for all of us, and it's our duty to care for it. It's just one dish, the land itself, and we all eat from it. We are all treaty people, us settlers as well, and we are all subject to the dish with one spoon. I couldn't do a land acknowledgement without naming the harms of colonization and the ways those harms are ongoing. When we talk today about hunger, it's important to name that Indigenous people face much higher rates of food insecurity than other communities, and that tragedy is directly traceable to the historical and ongoing process and violence of colonization. But today, when we talk about hunger, we shouldn't only look at the state of Indigenous food security with grief and contrition. I want us to also learn from these communities as stewards of the land from their 12,000-year history of resource sharing. Let us remember and be reminded that as treaty people, we are subject to these duties as well. In sight of these facts, I want to close by inviting us all to rededicate ourselves today and every day to the hard work of building and preserving solidarity, to center in everything we do our obligations to the land, to our communities, and to each other. Thanks. So, I want to get started. I want to stop talking and start hearing from these lovely folks. We're going to start 3 minutes apiece. I'm sure you can suspect you've all been prepared about the structure, but I just wanted to let the audience here now so they know what scaffolding we're dealing with. But we're going to, you're each year representing organizations with very different relationships to the ongoing food crisis. Some of you have a more local focus, others national, others global. But we're going to start from left right, perhaps, starting with Pat.
Sure.
We're going to start, I'm going to ask you to tell us a bit about your organization and your role and the work that you do to help build more resilient food systems.
Thanks so much, Grant. Yeah, so my name is Pat Dolan, and I am with the Grandmothers Advocacy Network, as you can see from our banner there. We're a group of mainly older women. We're all across the country in most provinces. We have a membership of about 300 people. They gather in smaller groups and get together, very often over Zoom these days. But we are small grand groups that work collectively together on issues. We have an international focus. We're very concerned about the inequities and the injustice that is happening in the global south. Right now, and that's one of the reasons I'm here, we're very focused on the right to food, because that too is a human right. But we are also concerned about the human rights protection of older women, grandmothers, children and youth, and gender diverse people in the global south. We have a special concern for the grandmothers of Africa, who are often among the poorest in their communities, but who also often shoulder responsibilities and leadership in their own communities. So our focus is really protecting the human rights of people. We have been around for about 10 years, and we have worked on other campaigns. We were very active on access to medicines in earlier days, and very concerned about vaccine equity a couple of years ago. And we have also worked on issues of education for girls, climate action, ending violence against women. Most of our advocacy is targeted to the Canadian federal government, because they are the ones who often are the decision makers on a lot of these issues where we want change to happen. We do all types of advocacy. We write letters, we write emails, we try to meet with our members of parliament, we try to meet with ministers. We haven't quite met with the Prime Minister yet, but maybe one of these days. And we attend public events and rallies. We do a lot of the work together, and as people have reminded me recently, decision makers listen to older women. We vote. We are an important part of their constituency. And so we want to bring our voice to making change and creating more social justice in this world. We've been involved in the Right to Food campaign, which we've been working on together since about last January, and boy, have we ever been on a learning journey. So I'm going to try to communicate some of what we've been learning as we've been going along, and I think I'll stop there.
Do you use the microphone or just talk as loud as you can?
Does the microphone not work?
I don't think so. No, it doesn't.
No.
Oh, just project.
Okay, project. Hi everyone, I'm here. I'm here on behalf of the Daily Bread Food Bank. We are the local based food bank here in Toronto. We have about 200 member agencies across the city. So we operate in a network style where we have member agencies from Etobicoke to Toronto to Scarborough. So we essentially serve the entire city except for North York. North York has a separate food bank called North York Harvest Food Bank. However, we do work with them closely. One of the things that we do with North York Harvest is that we release our annual Who's Hungry report. I brought some copies of the 2022 version. That's from last year, but I will tell you all that the Who's Hungry 2023 report is coming out next month on November 14th. So please do keep an eye out for that. And I think in the biography that was read at the opening of the panel, the Who's Hungry report has been done for nearly 2 decades. It is considered the go-to publication for media, for policymakers, for nonprofit groups, looking to get an understanding of what it is to live with food insecurity in the city of Toronto. And why this Who's Hungry report is unique is because we survey over 1,000 clients every year, and we ask them about the things that they're going through. We try to showcase how poverty keeps people trapped, how poverty restricts your options, how people have to cut certain expenses to make ends meet. And in this report that we put out every year, we also put forward policy recommendations. As was noted again in the opening, is that Daily Bread, we collaborate with all to end food insecurity and advocate for solutions to end poverty. and Daily Bread does not receive any government funding. So what this allows us to do is to collaborate with all orders of government, but we can also critique all orders of government. Most of our advocacy is on the municipal and provincial level. However, we have been branching into federal advocacy with the advent of the Canada Disability Benefit, which I'm happy to talk about during this panel. But what I think is really important to note is that nearly half of food bank clients who show up live with a disability. And we know that people with disabilities are more likely to have food insecurity, to live in poverty because of the discrimination they face in employment and in housing. At Daily Bread Food Bank, we've been around for, I think we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, which is unfortunate because food banks are an institution that were created in the 1980s as an emergency response. They were thought to be a temporary response. Unfortunately, we're still here 40 years later, and we are growing. And I just want to share one last stat, is that with, COVID was one thing, but this inflation that has happened in the last couple of years has been a whole other story. And I've been with Daily Bread for about a couple of years. I've joined just towards the end of 2021. And really before, the war in Ukraine in early 2022 and all the inflation pressures we've been seeing. And I can share that at Daily Bread, we used to spend $1.5 million a year on purchasing food. We are now spending $1.5 million every month on purchasing food. The crisis has quadrupled. Before, pre-COVID, we used to see about 65,000 client visits every month across the city. When the pandemic hit, that number went up to 120,000. And as of even in March, even in August, we've hit 270,000 client visits. This is a quadruple of what we used to see before COVID, and this is why we're spending so much more money on food. So it is more of a triple whammy, and I'm here to talk about the local context, but we're seeing that one, donations have dropped because people simply just do not have extra food to donate because of the cost of food. Two, the number of clients has significantly increased. We're seeing about 12,000 new clients every single month show up to our door, register to use a food bank for the first time in their life. And we know that when we're spending more money on buying food, there's going to be a lot of consequences. So I'll stop there maybe, but here from Daily Bread, I'm more happy to talk about the local context, what we've been seeing on the ground, and then I'll try to provide some insights and sneak peek of the upcoming Who's Hungry report and some of the work that we've been doing at Daily Bread to advocate for the right to food, which is what Pat mentioned. I think that's what we're all here to talk about, the right to food, and how can we achieve that right here in our community. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omar, for that. That's really, really important, and I think it also helps the stage. And I also want to thank you, Grant, for starting us off in a really, really good way with a longer land acknowledgement, because I think we think of land acknowledgement as like a check mark, and we don't focus. And I think your land acknowledgement forces us to stop and to think about our role as well as settlers. So thank you so much. And Ruth as well. I know that was a lot of work reading all those bios. Truly appreciate it. And so my name is Letitia Ama Diawo. I do go by Ama. And I wanted to share that, we're talking about food crisis. And I think it's important for us to understand that the food crisis is man-made. And if it's man-made, it means that it can be changed. The food crisis is created by climate change, political wars and sanctions, restrictive and uncertain food trade policies that makes it really, really difficult for a lot of communities and a lot of families to be able to feed themselves. At SeedChange, how do we approach the food crisis, or how do we approach our work in addressing the food crisis and also climate change issues? We look at food sovereignty, which really people's ability, communities' ability to be able to feed themselves, essentially, through seeds. So seed is a really, really powerful being, a really powerful seed that we all need. Everything we eat comes from seeds. The trees, everything comes from a seed. So in terms of our approach, one is really focused on banking on farmers' knowledge. A lot of indigenous communities and a lot of farmers carry with them so much knowledge about the land that they're on, the lands that they steward. They're experts, they're scientists, they're doctors within their field. And they pass this rich knowledge from generation to generation. And one of the key pieces for us as an organization is working with various farmers on the knowledge that they have, sharing that knowledge also, not just within communities, but also across the globe. Another part is we support ecological agriculture, or what we like to call agroecology, which is really the practice of growing food that takes in the environment into account, and also the people into account as well, for a resilient food system. I think we're talking a lot about food crisis, but it's also very much in line with the climate crisis that we're currently in. If we don't grow food in a resilient way, then it means that our collective food security is at risk. The other big piece to the work that we do is strengthening farmer seed systems and strengthening seed diversity and seed security. What I mean by that is that, when you go to the grocery store, we're used to seeing like maybe one type of carrot or two types of carrots, or just a few varieties of tomatoes, but how many people actually know that there are so many different varieties that have been taken from our system? So a big part of our work is working in Canada and working globally as well, to diversify the seeds that, the food that we have, and working on biodiversity, so making sure that we can have those seeds for generation and generation to come. Another piece is seed security. Without seeds, we have no food, and we want to make sure that seeds can stay in farmers' hands, that they can easily conserve those seeds, share those seeds among themselves without being penalized. To know that in 2023, there are still multi-corporational laws that makes it difficult for farmers to share seeds and actually criminalize them in that. So that's a big part of it. I know I'm running out of time. We also support local markets. Local markets are crucial and are important, in not just in mitigating against climate change and crises that may arise, but it also supports small-scale farmers to have a little bit of cash within their hands. And the other sort of approach to our work is looking at gender equity. And you wonder why? Because women are actually make up a majority of growers globally, and women, many women lack access to land to be able to grow food, to feed their communities. And actually women are also the ones who are protecting our world biodiversity. And it's something that I think we don't talk about a lot, but also deal with gender-based violence, multiple layers of issues as well that I think it's very, very important. So, and I want to add, I know we've been talking about statistics, but I want to add a little bit too, because I think sometimes when we think about food, or we think about who feeds us, we think that it's corporations, right? We go to the grocery store, we get food, we think it's the corporate world that's feeding us, but literally 70 to 80% of all farms produce around 80% of the world's foods in value terms. And it's also estimated that around 70% of all farms operate on just 7% of all agricultural land. So I think that gives you a bit of a perspective when we're talking about food crisis. And I think SeedChange, what we're bringing to this conversation is that global level, but also from a farmer's land. And I think it will complement very well with my other colleagues. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's always interesting going last, right? I feel like we've heard so much rich information already from the moderator and the other panelists that we already have an understanding of the depth and scope of this issue that we're all here to talk about. I want to say thank you to Ruth Ann and to Grant as well, on behalf of the One Campaign team in Canada, including my brilliant colleague. If you look to the right, and you'll see the one logo, Najiba. She's there, she leads our campaigns and supporter engagement portfolio. So before you leave this evening, please head over to our table. Thank you to Grant for inviting inviting us to hold space with you and all of you on this important conversation on the heels of World Food Day. Before I continue, I want to say congratulations to Omar and the Daily Bread for being named by Charity Intelligence Canada as one of the top-rated 2023 Toronto charities. They're doing the Lord's work, really. Just from what he's shared with us already, you understand how critical what they do is. I will try to echo as much as I can. Sorry. As Ruthen mentioned, my name is Minerva, and in addition to the bio that she read about me, I'm also a wife, and we have two amazing daughters. I serve on the board of a couple of nonprofit organizations in Toronto, and I'm also very engaged in the African and Caribbean communities in the GTA. I also lead partnerships at the One Campaign. Before today, with the exception of those who are with the GRAN team, who has heard of the One Campaign before today? Oh, we need everybody to hear about us. So more reasons to stop by and talk to Najiba before you leave. I'm based in Toronto, so is my colleague Najiba. And to tell you a little bit about One, let me see. Who here has heard of U2, the rock band, the Irish rock band? Okay, more people, awesome. Well, the lead singer of that band, Bono, he's the co-founder of the One Campaign. And we are a nonpartisan advocacy organization campaigning to end extreme poverty and preventable disease around the world, with a particular focus in sub-Saharan Africa. We are in capital cities in 9 countries, including Abuja, Berlin, Brussels, Dakar, Johannesburg, London, Paris, Washington, D.C., and of course in Ottawa. And we have a staff of close to 200, I would think. Similar to the Daily Bread Food Bank, we do not receive funding from the government, and we do not solicit money from the general public. So that means we can speak a bit more assertively on global issues and on Canada's role, particularly the government's role as a global leader on development issues. We are funded by a diverse group of philanthropists, foundations, and some corporate entities that share our mission to end extreme poverty and preventable disease. So what do we do at One, apart from having wonderful swag at our table? Well, with a policy and advocacy focus, we educate and advocate governments to shape policy solutions that save and improve millions of lives. We do this by lobbying political leaders, and our focus is the federal government. As Pat mentioned, these where policies are shaped, the budgets are created, so that is our focus. We lobby them, we run grassroots campaigns, and we empower citizens like you to hold our government accountable. Everything that we do is to put pressure on government to do more, to go beyond talking and promising, and to actually do more tangible, practical things to improve on development issues. When federal budgets tighten and funds for development programs that address hunger, nutrition, education, gender equality, and so forth, when those things are at risk, we fight for their continued funding. And what is at risk right now, some of my colleagues have mentioned so eloquently, is that more people are likely to be hungry in 2023 than they were in 2015. This stark reality tells us that food insecurity is rising fast in Canada and around the globe. At home, I manage our household budget. And last week I was recording and filing expenses. I don't know if I'm the only one who still file expenses, but and receipts from September, and I was shocked at how much more we spent on groceries. And as I shared this with my husband, we both paused and looked at each other thinking, what did we buy, right? And it wasn't necessarily that we bought more, it's just that the basic and common things that we need cost more. Right? And I'm sure many of you can relate to that, right? That's just our reality right now. And so for us at One, as it relates to working in this space, food insecurity and poverty are interconnected. They're interconnected challenges, and they are inextricably linked. And so knowing this, we have come together with a number of policy groups One of those groups is HPAC. HPAC is a humanitarian policy and advocacy group